It's great to be here. I'm really honored to be here, and I appreciate everybody's commitment to their faith and acting on their faith in a way that helps others. I really applaud that.
You know, 14,000 people here. These are people who are driven and committed to the gospel and taking the mission of the gospel across North America and then around the world. And one of the critical issues facing the advance of that mission is religious liberty. We have issues of people, institutions that are being told they can't hold to a Christian understanding of reality and still operate that way. We have all sorts of impediments taking place from the contraceptive mandate all the way over to questions about tax exemption, which I want to talk about in just a minute. But how would you, if you were elected president, ensure and maintain religious freedom for everybody?
This is perhaps the most important discussion we need to have as a country going forward. The recent ruling as it relates to marriage puts into doubt now religious conscience, acting on your faith, not just faith. In fact, people will say, it's okay to be religious, just do it in your church and do it at home. But don't act on your faith in the public square, because that's discriminatory against others that may not agree with it. It's the other way around. This is the first freedom. This is a foundational freedom in our country. And so to sort this out, I think we need to make sure, based on this ruling, that really called into question people of conscience being able to do exactly what you described. I think we certainly need to talk about it. The president should have not just the right, but has the duty to explain why this is a threat to not just religious freedom, but other freedoms. You take this one away, it's very easy to imagine other freedoms being taken away as well. And that it goes way beyond just your faith, it goes to conscience. You have to act on your faith for it to be a fulfillment of Jesus' calling to you. And so RFRA is one way to do it, state by state, but certainly I think a discussion federally to make sure that we don't want to create an environment of discrimination against people based on sexual orientation, but we certainly don't want to discriminate against people that believe that their faith drives their actions and the things that they consider to be important. That balance is what we need to find, and the next president is going to need to do this and depoliticize this. Oh my gosh, this goes to the foundation of a free society. This goes way beyond politics.
Well, sometimes when we start talking about religious freedom, politicians tend to go wobbly. Because people respond, they find this to be controversial. We've seen that happen over and over again. How do you use the bully pulpit to teach the American people about the importance of religious freedom?
So, I have town hall meetings all over the place. We don't screen people. They come. Some of them come organized to try to make me look stupid. That's not as hard as you might imagine. I can do that on my own, but if they organize it, makes it a little better. And so this happens all the time. And this question comes up in a lot of different ways. And so you don't pull back from what you believe, you persuade people. I think we're a big, tolerant country that we ought to be able to find this common ground. Using the story of the baker or the florist. People get this pretty quick when you say, if someone walks into a flower shop and says, I'd like to buy some flowers, and the owner of the flower shop says, no, you're gay and I'm not going to sell to you, that's discrimination. But if someone walks into a flower shop and says, you're the only florist around here that I believe can arrange the flowers for my wedding, a gay couple, you should not be compelled to participate in that wedding. People get that. And that's what we need to do. We need to sort this out in a way that there's understanding and tolerance for other people's views. This should not be a political conversation. This should be something much more profound. So I do think that there's much more clarity about this once people understand it. The best example is the Little Sisters of Charity, group of nuns that are compelled to have contraceptives in their healthcare plan, and the courts are ruling against them for this. I mean, this is the insistence of HHS, Big Brother, telling the Little Sisters that they have to have contraceptives, going totally against their own faith as devout Catholics. It gets absurd pretty quick, and if you persuade people with these kinds of facts and stories, I think you can win people over.
One of the things that is of interest is the issue of tax exemption. In the Obergefell oral arguments, the Solicitor General said tax exemption will be an issue for Catholic and evangelical and other institutions that don't accept or practice same-sex marriage. Do you see tax exemption as a government benefit, or do you see tax exemption as something else? And how would you protect that?
Well, by putting people in the Justice Department and Solicitor Generals that don't threaten to take away tax-exempt status for religious organizations because they don't fit the orthodoxy of the time. I mean, that was a deeply troubling conversation. Now, the judges didn't necessarily, you know, they didn't accept that notion, but there was the threat going forward. And so the more people understand what's at risk here, I think the greater the probability that we can protect religious freedom. And religious freedom can be an individual, it can be a business, a small business where someone is, the guiding principles of their business relates to their faith. It can be religious organizations, it can be affiliates to churches, it can be churches itself. And across that spectrum, there needs to be protections across the board.
We have brothers and sisters in Christ, all of us in this room, across the world who are imperiled. We see images of my brothers and sisters in Christ being beheaded, being driven out of their homes. We have places that are on the maps in our Bibles where Christians and Jews are virtually extinct now. And so if your military commanders came into you and said, President Bush, you have two options. One option is we pull out and there's going to be this sort of essentially genocide of religious minorities. Or we're going to have boots on the ground, back-end engagement in war in the Middle East. What would your response be?
Well, first of all, it is tragic to see what happens when American leadership, when we pull back, when we leave from behind. The net result is these voids are filled by threats of barbaric Islamic terrorism. And you're absolutely correct, there are some of the oldest Christian communities in civilization are being wiped out. I have my daughter-in-law is born in Canada, but her parents are Iraqi Christians. And I've been sensitized to the plight of Iraqi Christians because of my beautiful daughter-in-law. I mean, literally organized to wipe out one of the core Christian communities since the beginning of time. And we need to stand up for people that are under attack like this. But for us, who else? Who in the world considers this a value worth fighting for other than the United States? And so, whether you have, please, applaud. It's a good thing. Whether it's boots on the ground or using special forces or re-engaging politically, diplomatically in a way that where we use our military in a thoughtful way. We don't necessarily have armed combat troops. We're not the world's policemen, but we're the world's leader. And that leadership needs to be beyond just security. It needs to be about the values that are really important to us and protecting them. Because particularly now, look at the world. The rising powers of Russia and China, this is not part of their script, I promise you that. Europe, as it's in decline and its influence wanes, no longer views this as a high value as well. The two countries in the world that will protect Christians in the places of great vulnerability are Israel and the United States. And Israel should not do this on its own. This goes beyond Iraq and Syria, although it's tragic there. It goes to places like Nigeria, where Boko Haram captures Christian girls, teenagers, and they're still held hostage. We have no clue where they are. To use a hypothetical, it's real, but why wouldn't we work with the Nigerian government and use these extraordinary capacities we have as special forces to save those young girls? Or with the Copts under attack when the Muslim Brotherhood were in Egypt, and we saw this, we saw 19 Christians, I don't know if you saw the video, 19 Christians being beheaded on the shores of the Mediterranean in Libya as they were saying the Lord's Prayer. This is why we need to be engaged, because without us, we'll see more and more of this all across the world. And by our inaction and a lack of strategy to deal with radical jihad, we also now have the threat of homegrown terrorism in our midst.
When you think about moral principles in taking that on, what about things along the lines of waterboarding, enhanced interrogation, or even torture? How would you make those moral decisions about what we as a country should do and not do?
I think the law we have today is the proper one. where enhanced interrogation is a dangerous thing to say because that means different things to different people. But waterboarding is no longer legal. I think we can, if we're engaged and we're fully engaged, we protect the homeland, we're engaged in the world, we can use in techniques that validate our values as a country. I think that's the proper way to go. But if we pull back and we vacillate and we say we're going to lead from behind, and we're part of the community of nations and this language of kind of, we're just part of we're going to be an interesting voice in the United Nations, rather than being a leader for freedom and protection of the most vulnerable around the world, we're going to have more and more problems.
Now, I'm sure you've seen, if you've not seen the videos, you've seen reports of these Planned Parenthood undercover videos that have really shocked the conscience of the nation right now. There was a vote that failed in the United States Senate yesterday to defund Planned Parenthood. Would you think that we have a continuing resolution coming up to fund the government, given the atrocity of these children being destroyed with such callous disregard for their lives? Shouldn't we make that an issue and say, not one more red cent to Planned Parenthood?
We should, and the next president should be Planned Parenthood. I have the benefit of having been governor, and we did defund Planned Parenthood when I was governor. We tried to create a culture of life across the board. The argument against this is, well, women's health issues are going to be, you're attacking, it's a war on women, and you're attacking women's health issues. You could take dollar for dollar, although I'm not sure we need $500 million for women's health issues. But if you took dollar for dollar, there are many extraordinarily fine organizations, community health organizations that exist, federally sponsored community health organizations to provide quality care for women on a wide variety of health issues. But abortion should not be funded by the government, any government in my mind. So, we need to get back to regular order way. Look, the country's been in existence for 240 years. It's been a pretty good ride. This is the greatest country on the face of the earth still, with all our problems. We still lead the world in so many ways. We've had this dysfunction for a brief period of time. I don't know how many times we've had government shutdowns and budgets not passed. If I'm president, we're going to respect the Constitution and get back to regular order way where democracy works again. You submit a budget, you work with Congress, you pass a budget, and in that budget, I can promise you there will not be $500 million going to Planned Parenthood.
Say to people who would say, well, yes, but if you're repealing Obamacare, you're dealing with entitlement reform and so forth. We have vulnerable single mothers in our communities, including in many of the urban areas that these pastors are serving. Aren't we turning them over to Planned Parenthood when we don't have a robust support system economically around them?
Well, this is a place where my personal belief is that life should be cherished. It's a gift from God from beginning to end. And if people are in vulnerable circumstances, government has a duty to help. Maybe more effectively than creating a culture of dependency around people, maybe we help people that are acting on their heart, like many of you do, which I applaud. There's many better ways to do what government does today in isolation of the big and caring hearts of our community. But certainly we, as a just and loving and generous society, should have a government that puts the most vulnerable in our society in the front of the line. And that's what I did as governor of the state of Florida. I'll tell you a story. When I got my first week in office, a federal judge was about ready to take over a program for the developmentally disabled. I'm brand new, rookie governor. I go, how can federal judges can do this? Really? I mean, it's like I had to ask my legal counsel. Apparently they can. It's like one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. But so I go to a federal courtroom in Miami and I plead to say, please don't take over this. Allow me to go to the legislature, recraft the program, put enough money into it so that we can get a 28,000, I think, person waiting list gone. These are people whose families worry about outliving their child. These are adults that are 20 or 30 years old, and can you imagine how hard it is to wake up each day to take care and love your child with all your heart and soul, and worry that you're going to die before they do because they can't take care of themselves. Now that, if you had to pick a group that should be in the front of the line, it's the developmentally disabled. It's children in foster care. It's drug-addicted people. There are all sorts of people where we can't abandon them. We should never do that. And so there is a tendency in my party, I think, sometimes to say we just have to gut government. We need to make these programs more effective, but we should never turn our backs on people that are stuck in poverty. I think a definition of a successful person is one that does act on their heart, and we should assume that people want to be lifted out of poverty. 6 more million people are in poverty today than the day that the current president was elected. That's not a sign of success, not for them and not for us. We need to create a society where people have the right to rise, and that means to take care of them in their most vulnerable times.
Many of the pastors in this room are serving in communities where they have people who are in their communities being, for instance, harassed when they walk into a store. African American, Latino people who go into stores and they're suspected of shoplifting in a way that white Americans never would be. We have seen incidents taken with cameras, some on cell phones all over this country, that it really rocks the country over the last year. Do you think there is a problem of systemic, institutionalized racism in American life?
I think racism still does exist, for sure. I don't think it's as bad as it was in the 60s when we had official racism and segregation. It's certainly not that, but it's a quieter but a insidious form of it, for sure. And it needs to be dealt with. We need to confront it head on. I have enormous respect for law enforcement officers. They have a really difficult job. And they're in the isolated cases where you see these tragedies unfold, we watch them on TV. I don't think that's the norm, but when it happens, there should be swift justice, for sure. And we also, the bigger issue, I think, Russell, is what do we do with people that have lost their way, that may have committed a crime, that can't get back on track because they can't get a job, who really are kind of isolated from the mainstream society because of problems they may have had. They went to horrible schools and never learned how to read and write to be able to fill out a form to get a job. Maybe they committed a crime and they're stuck. That's, I think, a great challenge. We have large numbers of people now that are stuck, and we ought to move. And this is one place where the left and right are converging, where Barack Obama and Charles Koch agree. This is a magical moment in American political life. That this idea of restorative justice, I think, is another element of this, of the barriers now on people's aspirations. We ought to figure out ways to make sure that these communities you talk about are safe and secure, which is why we need to support law enforcement, because many of the crimes are committed inside the community. And then we need to figure out ways where people have a second chance. Where you have, when I was governor, we had support for a offender program where we allowed people, we created incentives for people to be hired out of prison. I created the first faith-based prison in the country, full faith-based prison, which allowed, they voluntarily went to this prison in Lodi, Florida, for their last 2 years. They did all the things that prisoners had to do, and then they also spent 3 or 4 hours reading the Bible. Volunteers would come in, mentoring them so that when they got out of prison, the hope was that they would attend that church, they would get a job, and they would live a life that would be a lot more purposeful and meaningful than what they would have done had they just been cast aside.
Do you think the war on drugs is the problem?
The war on drugs it's the addiction to drugs is the problem. You know, look, I've been hanging out in New Hampshire recently. I don't know if you haven't been there. It's a beautiful place. And the heroin epidemic, not just in New Hampshire, but across this country, is deeply troubling. People addicted to painkillers are finding ways to, instead of use Oxycontin or something like that at an expensive price, are now resorting to low-cost heroin. And they're addicted to it, and then we see deaths, increasing deaths and addiction levels that are extraordinary. And so this relates to the hollowness of the heart as much as it does about interdiction problem and things like this. I think we need to have secure borders for all sorts of reasons, one of which is the import of low-cost heroin that is a plague in many of the particularly urban communities, but not just there, it's across the spectrum of life. And we ought to make sure that we have adequate drug treatment programs as well. And there ought to be a certainty of punishment for people that are dealing this poison into the communities as well.
Now, when you were a young man growing up in Texas, you probably never imagined that one day you would be on television with Donald Trump. But you will be this week.
When I was growing up, we didn't have reality TV.
Okay.
It's a different culture back then. I'm really old.
Well, one of the things that Donald Trump has said is that we have a problem of the Mexican government sending the worst people over here, and they're committing rapes and they're committing murders. You took a good bit of criticism when you said that most of the people coming across the border are doing so out of an act of love.
Sure. I mean, this is the world we're in, where you can't express a pretty common sense thing. The great majority of people coming here want to provide for their families. It's a pretty good value. It should be done legally rather than illegally, but why shouldn't we just say that's a bad thing? And for those that come for bad reasons, we ought to make sure that we have a certain, we have border security, we make sure we don't have sanctuary cities, that we enforce the law well to protect us. That's the duty of government. You can do both, and I think the harsh language is wrong. There are people that are quite angry about the lack of rule of law. They see America moving away from them. They see disrespect for just the things that they hold true and believe in. And I don't think politicians should prey on those fears and that anger and that angst. They should try to lift people up and give them a sense that we can fix these things, and in doing so, rise up again and be the great nation that we've always been. And so we have a different view, a different tone and a different view. I respect the guy who's the front runner in the Republican nomination. I mean, this is a serious thing. But I think to win and to govern the right way, we have to unite rather than divide.
Of course, the front runner on the Democratic side is Hillary Clinton, who
That's what I hear.
Bill Clinton has been very active with your dad, with your brother, working in various areas. Talks Time Magazine last week, and the last President Bush and President Clinton talking about themselves as kind of brothers. So you have some history here, and we as Christians.
Where are we going with this, Russell?
We as Christians are called to pray for everybody and to honor all people. And so, how would you advise us to honor Hillary Clinton and to pray for her?
Look, first of all, we're going to be talking about the brother-father part of this. There's a club of past presidents. There's a mutual respect there. I admire that. But Bill Clinton is not my stepbrother. Okay? Just want to be sure. I pray for everybody in positions of leadership, for sure. And I think it's important to recognize that people that you don't agree with aren't necessarily bad people. They just might be wrong. Is that possible? That there should be a restoration of civility. There is no reason to personalize everything, demonize people. And I'm going to break my rule a little bit right here. I hope I passed the test. President Obama spends a lot of time pushing down people to make his view look better. And what happens is gap gets bigger and bigger, and then you try to solve a problem, and there's no trust. There's no belief that either side believes in each other, and nothing happens. And particularly for young people, this is a really dangerous time because we keep letting these problems fester. They don't go away. They get worse and worse. They compound out in a really ugly fashion. And so my aspiration is to not do that. I don't ascribe bad motives to people that I don't agree with. I want to persuade them that maybe with a little bit of thought, maybe they're wrong, and maybe they could join our team. Or find a way to forge consensus on the things that we might agree with and build on that. That's what American democracy has been based on. And I'll stand on principle, on the basic things that are really important, life being one of them for sure. But I think we need to figure out a way to change the environment, the culture in Washington, D.C. particularly, to begin solving problems, for crying out loud. And so I don't ascribe any bad motive to Hillary Clinton, but I think her approach, the top-down progressive approach, where it's all decided from up above and we just basically get in line, do what we're told, is not the one that has created the greatness of this most extraordinary country and place to be in.
You've lost about 40 pounds on this paleo diet. And
can you imagine what I looked like before?
Here's just what I want to say to you. When President Obama was elected and said he was going to give up cigarettes, I didn't think that was a good idea. It's not the time to give up cigarettes when you're going to be given the nuclear codes. And it worked out for him, and I'm not happy for him. But I really don't want you, if you were to become president, to be angry and irritable because of lack of nutrition. So if that happens, we'll go to Chick-fil-A.
Absolutely. One of the ways that I can successfully stay on this diet is cheat. So I have Sunday fun day. That's my day of rest. Unless I get home really late, I try to play golf really fast. I take a shower really quick. I go to mass at 10:30. Then I go to Publix. Then I'm with my family, where I typically make guacamole for my family, and we have Sunday fun day for 3 or 4 hours. And that, if I can do that, and that's where I cheat, because I eat chocolate ice cream with my 2 precious granddaughters.
Let's thank Governor Jeb Bush.
Thank you all very much.